What really happened between Bruce Lee and Bolo Yeung? On one side was the lightning-fast martial arts legend, whose philosophy reshaped cinema and inspired millions. On the other was the musclebound powerhouse, whose presence on screen was so intimidating it became impossible to ignore. Together, they created one of the most unforgettable on-screen pairings in martial arts history. But behind the fights, behind the perfectly choreographed kicks and bone-crushing stares, there are stories that most fans have never heard. For decades, whispers have circled in both Hollywood and martial arts communities. Rumors about how close Bruce and Bolo really were, questions about whether their friendship was genuine or whether there was more rivalry simmering beneath the surface. Bolo himself has given rare interviews over the years, dropping confessions that reveal a side of Bruce Lee that the public never saw. Some of what he has shared is inspiring, some of it is heartbreaking, and some of it raises even more questions about what really happened during those years. This isn't just the story of two men who trained and fought together on screen. It's a story of ambition, discipline, jealousy, tragedy, and legacy. A story that begins in poverty and ends in superstardom, with shocking turns along the way that shaped not only their lives, but the entire martial arts film industry. Today, we're diving deep into the bond, the conflict, and the truth behind Bruce Lee and Bolo Yeung. Bolo Yeung's journey began far from the bright lights of cinema. Born Yangshi in Guangzhou, China in 1946, his childhood was defined by hardship. The country was still reeling from war, poverty was widespread, and opportunities were scarce. While many kids his age played in the streets, Bolo found himself drawn to something different, the mysterious and disciplined world of martial arts. By the time he was 10 years old, he was sneaking into parks to watch kung fu masters practice, mesmerized by every stance and strike. Unlike the other children, who quickly grew restless, Bolo could spend hours copying their movements, pushing his small, skinny frame through the drills with sheer determination. But fascination wasn't enough. Bolo sought out teachers, learning from whoever would take him under their wing, slowly building not just skill, but an unshakable discipline that would stay with him for life. His parents, however, weren't convinced. They saw martial arts as nothing more than a distraction, something that would never provide a future. To them, it was a phase their son would eventually abandon. But Bolo was stubborn. He kept training in secret, building his body and sharpening his technique in ways few of his peers could imagine. Then came the twist that set him apart: bodybuilding. In the 1950s, China had no gyms, no supplements, and no culture of weight training, but Bolo wasn't deterred. At 16, he began lifting anything he could find: stones, scrap metal, makeshift bars, improvising a training regimen that would transform him. With no protein shakes or fancy equipment, he relied solely on grit and consistency. Slowly, his body changed. The boy who had once been overlooked grew into a figure that was impossible to ignore. In a matter of years, he had sculpted a physique unlike anything China had seen. By the early 1960s, he and his family made a bold move to Hong Kong, a city under British rule and alive with opportunity. For Bolo, this wasn't just a relocation. It was an escape. Mainland China's communist government left little room for dreamers or artists, but Hong Kong was becoming a hub for martial arts films and entertainment. Here, he finally had a chance to prove himself. Entering the Mr. Hong Kong bodybuilding competition, he dominated year after year, eventually holding the title for nearly a decade. His enormous muscles and commanding presence turned him into a local icon. Casting directors couldn't look away, and before long, he was being offered small film roles. But there was a catch. Bolo was never cast as the hero. His size was simply too overwhelming. He didn't fit the mold of the underdog audiences were meant to root for. Instead, he was pushed into villain roles: the muscly-bound henchman, the silent enforcer. At first, he accepted it, understanding the industry's limitations. But he refused to play these roles lazily. If he was going to be a villain, he would redefine what that meant. He brought a quiet menace to his performances, letting his stare do the talking. Producers soon realized he could steal a scene without saying a word, and audiences began to remember him long after the credits rolled. Off-screen, though, Bolo was nothing like the characters he portrayed. He was reserved, even shy, and carried himself with humility. Friends described him as soft-spoken, more interested in discipline and philosophy than in intimidation. This duality, the terrifying villain on screen and the thoughtful man in real life, gave him a depth that made him stand out. But Hong Kong in the 1970s was brimming with talent. To truly break through, he needed more than muscles and presence. He needed the right connection, a mentor or partner who could see beyond his typecasting and elevate him into something more. And that moment came when he crossed paths with a man whose vision and talent were unlike anything the industry had ever witnessed. In 1973, fate brought Bolo Yeung into the orbit of Bruce Lee, and from that moment forward, his life and his career would never be the same. Their first meeting didn't happen on the set of a blockbuster film, but during something far more ordinary, a commercial shoot for Winston cigarettes in the early 1970s. Yet that simple encounter would spark one of the most intriguing bonds in martial arts cinema history. When Bolo Yeung met Bruce Lee, he immediately recognized something different. Bruce wasn't just another actor trying to look tough for the cameras. His speed, his precision, and his intensity radiated from every movement. To Bolo, who had spent years refining his own discipline and building a body that looked indestructible, Bruce represented a completely different kind of power, one that wasn't built on sheer muscle, but on efficiency, speed, and mental focus. Bruce, in turn, saw something in Bolo that Hollywood often overlooked. He wasn't just a wall of muscle meant to intimidate audiences. Beneath the massive chest and bulging arms was a martial artist who understood the art and philosophy behind every strike. Bruce respected that, and the respect was mutual. What began as a brief professional interaction quickly developed into a personal connection. They started training together, and those sessions became legendary. Bruce pushed Bolo to refine his agility, drilling him in explosive movements and speed that challenged his naturally heavy frame. At the same time, Bolo introduced Bruce to strength-based training, showing him how to harness raw power in ways that amplified his already devastating strikes. They weren't just exchanging techniques. They were building a hybrid philosophy, blending speed and strength, precision and power. To outsiders, it was clear they were more than training partners. They were pushing each other to new heights, testing limits that neither could have reached alone. Their bond extended beyond the gym. Both men were fascinated by the deeper meaning of martial arts. Bruce spoke often about martial arts as a way of life, not just a means of fighting, and Bolo connected with that vision. They would discuss philosophy, discipline, and the pursuit of perfection, sharing ideas that went beyond punches and kicks. This was the backdrop when Bruce began preparing for his most ambitious project yet, Enter the Dragon. He wasn't just starring in the film, he was heavily involved in shaping its casting and choreography. For Bruce, authenticity was everything. He didn't want background thugs who looked intimidating but lacked skill. He wanted fighters who could bring real presence to the screen. And when it came time to cast the villain, Bruce had no hesitation. He wanted Bolo, not as a faceless henchman, but as a character that could truly stand out. In fact, the character's name was changed to Bolo in his honor, cementing him as more than just another supporting role. It was a decision that would alter Bolo's career forever. But working with Bruce wasn't easy. His perfectionism was legendary. Every move, every punch, every kick had to be executed with surgical precision. On set, Bruce pushed Bolo harder than anyone else, insisting on dozens of retakes until every sequence looked flawless. For Bolo, who was used to relying on his physical presence, this level of detail was exhausting. Yet he respected it. Bruce's demand for excellence forced him to refine his own craft, sharpening his movements until they were as crisp as his physique was imposing. Behind the cameras, their relationship was a mixture of camaraderie and intensity. They trained together, laughed together, but also challenged each other fiercely. Bruce would tease Bolo about his size, saying that all the muscle slowed him down. Bolo, in return, would push Bruce to prove that speed alone could overcome raw strength. These exchanges weren't just playful, they were lessons, each man learning from the other. Audiences would later see only the finished product, the iconic showdown between Bruce and Bolo on screen. But what they didn't see was the sweat, the repetition, and the clashes of willpower that went into creating those moments. By the time Enter the Dragon wrapped, Bruce and Bolo weren't just co-stars. They were bonded by shared struggle, mutual respect, and the unspoken knowledge that together they had created something unforgettable. Still, beneath the brotherhood, subtle tensions lingered. Bruce's star was rising rapidly, and Bolo knew that while his role was iconic, he was still cast as the villain, the man destined to lose. Some whispers on set suggested jealousy, others hinted at quiet rivalry. And as the cameras stopped rolling, the question began to form. Was this bond between Bruce Lee and Bolo Yeung truly as unshakable as it appeared, or was there something more complicated hidden beneath the surface? The friendship between Bruce Lee and Bolo Yeung looked solid to the outside world, but as with many legendary partnerships, there were whispers behind the curtain. Hollywood insiders and martial arts enthusiasts began speculating about the true nature of their bond, and over the years, those whispers grew into rumors that added layers of mystery to their story. On one hand, they were seen training partners, brothers in spirit who pushed each other to the limit. On the other, some claimed their relationship was more complicated, part respect, part rivalry. Bruce Lee was known for his perfectionism, a trait that often pushed his co-stars to exhaustion. He demanded flawless execution, refusing to accept anything less than perfection in both training and filming. For Bolo, this could be frustrating. His natural strength and raw presence made him a force on screen, but Bruce constantly drilled him to be sharper, faster, and more precise. To outsiders, this created the impression that Bruce treated Bolo more like a student than an equal, fueling speculation that tension existed between them. Then there were the rumors of jealousy. By the early 1970s, Bruce had become an international superstar, while Bolo was still cast primarily as villains, the men who were doomed to fall at the hero's hands. Some within the Hong Kong film industry suggested that Bolo struggled with being overshadowed, his massive physique no match for Bruce's charisma and lightning speed in the eyes of the audience. Was he resentful? Or did he see Bruce's rise as an opportunity rather than a threat? Accounts differ, and Bolo himself has never publicly shown bitterness. But whispers persisted that he longed for more than the one-dimensional villain roles that kept him in Bruce's shadow. Adding fuel to the speculation were reports that Bruce had been developing ideas for future films before his death, one of which would have pitted him and Bolo in a climactic one-on-one battle as equals. If true, this project might have elevated Bolo's status beyond that of the eternal villain. But Bruce's sudden passing meant the project never materialized, and so the possibility of seeing their rivalry play out in a film designed to showcase both men equally died with him. The fact that Bolo remained mostly silent about Bruce for decades only deepened the mystery. Why didn't he speak more openly about their relationship? Was it grief, loyalty, or something he chose to keep private for other reasons? Even among martial arts circles, some claim there were heated moments during training, times when Bolo's immense strength clashed with Bruce's relentless pace, creating a silent competition between the two. Yet when Bolo eventually did open up, he described Bruce with respect and admiration, dismissing talk of rivalry as media exaggeration. He acknowledged Bruce's unmatched intensity and vision, saying it was something he had never seen in anyone else. Still, the very need for him to address these rumors showed how powerful they had become in shaping the narrative around their bond. What's clear is that both men recognized in each other qualities they didn't possess themselves. Bruce valued Bolo's size and power, while Bolo admired Bruce's speed and philosophy. Their friendship might have contained elements of rivalry, but perhaps that was exactly what made it so strong. They weren't competing to destroy each other, but to push each other further. Still, the timing of Bruce's death in 1973 left the world with unanswered questions. What would have happened if Bruce had lived longer? Would Bolo have stepped into the spotlight alongside him, finally breaking free of the villain roles that limited him? Or would he always have been remembered as the shadow standing behind Bruce's blazing star? One thing is certain. Once Bruce was gone, Bolo's silence became part of the mystery. And it wouldn't be until much later that he revealed what he had truly seen behind the legend's unstoppable image. Behind Bruce Lee's dazzling kicks and unshakable confidence was a man fighting battles few ever saw. To the world, he was unstoppable, a martial artist who could outpace any opponent and a movie star who seemed destined to conquer Hollywood. But beneath that image were hidden struggles, and these struggles reveal the human side of Bruce that even those closest to him sometimes overlooked. One of his earliest and most painful challenges came from Hollywood itself. In the late 1960s, the idea of an Asian actor leading a major American television series or film was nearly unthinkable to the studios. Bruce had charisma, unmatched talent, and the looks of a star, but executives labeled him too foreign for American audiences. When he pitched a show idea about a wandering martial artist in the Old West, it was accepted, only for the lead role to be handed to David Carradine, a white actor with no martial arts background. The series became known as Kung Fu, and to this day, many recognize how much of it was drawn directly from Bruce's original concept. To be denied the role of the very show he created was a betrayal that cut deeply, and it underscored the racism and barriers he faced in Hollywood. Even so, Bruce refused to be silenced. If America would not give him the spotlight, he would return to Hong Kong and seize it for himself. In Asia, Bruce quickly proved his star power with hits like The Big Boss and Fist of Fury, reclaiming his identity and showing Hollywood what they had lost. But while audiences saw triumph, behind the scenes, Bruce was wrestling with questions of belonging. Born in San Francisco but raised in Hong Kong, he often felt like an outsider in both worlds, too Western in Asia, too Asian in America. That cultural tension was something he carried quietly, even as he broke barriers for others. His physical struggles were just as daunting. In 1970, Bruce suffered a devastating back injury while performing a good morning exercise with excessive weight. Doctors warned him that he might never practice martial arts again, let alone return to the screen. For a man who had built his entire life around movement and mastery of the body, it was a crushing blow. But Bruce refused to accept it as the end. During his recovery, he immersed himself not just in physical therapy, but also in philosophy and mental training. He rebuilt his body step by step, transforming weakness into strength, though he lived with chronic pain for the rest of his life. That pain never stopped him, but it added a hidden weight to everything he achieved. By the time Enter the Dragon began production in 1973, Bruce was at the height of his powers, yet his relentless pursuit of perfection came at a cost. On set, he was more than an actor. He was choreographer, producer, and sometimes even editor. He obsessed over every frame, every detail, refusing to let anything slip. The long hours and non-stop demands left him exhausted. Friends and colleagues began to notice changes. His weight dropped dramatically, his once full face becoming lean and almost gaunt. Still, Bruce pushed forward, unwilling to slow down. Then came the health scares. He collapsed once during post-production, suffering seizures and headaches that alarmed those around him. Doctors advised rest, but Bruce's obsession with completing the film left little room for recovery. He believed in pushing his body beyond limits, and for a time it seemed his willpower was stronger than anything. But even willpower has a breaking point. On July 20, 1973, at just 32 years old, Bruce Lee died unexpectedly. The official cause was cerebral edema, a swelling of the brain, but the circumstances fueled endless speculation. Some blamed stress, others pointed to overtraining or a reaction to medication, while conspiracy theories hinted at something darker. Whatever the truth, the world had lost a legend at his peak. For Bolo Yeung, the news was more than a professional tragedy. Just weeks earlier, they had been on set together, sweating through fight scenes and discussing plans for future projects. Now Bruce was gone, and with him the chance for Bolo to share the screen once more in the way they had both dreamed of. For decades, Bolo spoke little about the pain of that moment, but it's clear that Bruce's hidden struggles left a lasting impression. Behind the legend of Bruce Lee was a man carrying rejection, cultural isolation, chronic pain, and an intensity that pushed his body past its limits. It is this hidden side that makes his story not just one of triumph, but also of tragedy. And when Bolo finally opened up years later, his revelations showed that what he witnessed in Bruce was far more complex than the flawless hero the world adored. For years after Bruce Lee's death, Bolo Yeung remained silent. He never rushed to share stories or capitalize on their friendship. Instead, he let the legend of Bruce speak for itself. But when he finally began to open up in rare interviews, what he revealed was not what most people expected. To the world, Bruce was untouchable, a man whose speed and skill bordered on the supernatural. To Bolo, he was something even more extraordinary, both greater and more human than the myth that followed him. Bolo has often described Bruce as the most intense person he ever trained with, a man who carried an energy that changed the atmosphere of a room the second he walked in. According to Bolo, when Bruce entered a space, conversations quieted, people straightened, and there was an unspoken acknowledgement that someone different, someone operating on another level, had arrived. Yet that intensity came with a cost. Bruce never switched off. Training, philosophy, diet, discipline, Everything was done with extreme focus. Bolo revealed that Bruce didn't just punch faster than anyone else, he trained with a level of obsession that most people would find unbearable. Every movement was analyzed, perfected, and repeated until it became second nature. Bruce treated his body like a machine, fueling it with strict meals of lean proteins, vegetables, and rice, never indulging in the junk food that surrounded other actors on set. To Bolo, this was proof that Bruce's greatness wasn't an accident. It was the result of endless sacrifice. But Bolo's confessions went deeper than admiration. He spoke about how Bruce carried a weight most people never saw. The world expected perfection from him every single day, and Bruce pushed himself to deliver it, no matter the cost to his health or peace of mind. Bolo admitted that behind the sharp kicks and flawless choreography was a man who often looked exhausted, his body worn down by the sheer intensity of his schedule. This wasn't weakness, it was humanity. And it was something Bolo believed made Bruce's achievements even more remarkable. When asked to compare Bruce's era with modern action films, Bolo didn't hold back. He criticized the reliance on special effects, camera tricks, and CGI that dominate today's blockbusters. To him, Bruce's magic was that he didn't need illusions. His strength, speed, and power were real, built through sweat, pain, and years of discipline. What audiences saw on screen wasn't an illusion, it was Bruce's authentic ability. Bolo lamented that modern martial arts cinema had lost that raw authenticity. He saw Bruce not just as a fighter, but as a man who embodied the truth of martial arts. To him, Bruce's fights weren't just entertainment, they were philosophy in motion. Yet despite the weight of these revelations, Bolo always spoke with warmth when remembering Bruce. He described their training sessions as battles of respect, each man pushing the other to go beyond their limits. He acknowledged that Bruce teased him about being too muscular and slow, while he challenged Bruce to prove that speed could overcome strength. These moments, Bolo said, were more than practice, they were the foundation of a brotherhood. Still, the silence that followed Bruce's death lingered for decades. Many wondered why Bolo didn't speak sooner or write books about his time with Bruce. His answer was simple: respect. He didn't want to exploit their friendship or reduce Bruce to a collection of anecdotes. When he finally did open up, it was only to honor him, to share the truth that Bruce was not a mythical figure, but a man who had worked harder, suffered more, and believed more deeply than anyone else. Bolo's confessions painted a picture of Bruce Lee that was both inspiring and heartbreaking, a man whose brilliance came at the cost of his health, whose determination pushed him to greatness, but also to exhaustion. And yet, for all the tragedy in Bruce's story, Bolo's words always came back to admiration. He never stopped calling Bruce his brother, never stopped honoring the lessons he learned. In the end, Bolo's revelations weren't about rivalry or jealousy, but about respect and gratitude. He believed Bruce gave the world something irreplaceable, and that even decades later, no one had matched the fire he brought to both life and cinema. But perhaps the most powerful part of Bolo's reflections wasn't about Bruce's fists or speed at all. It was about the legacy that still continues to shape martial arts, film, and culture long after Bruce's final fight. Bruce Lee's death in 1973 left a void that no one could fill, but his influence never faded. For Bolo Yeung, the impact of their friendship went far beyond the set of Enter the Dragon. He often said that Bruce wasn't just a co-star or a training partner, he was a visionary whose ideas reshaped everything he touched. Even decades later, Bolo continues to speak of him with reverence, describing Bruce as a force of nature who redefined what it meant to be a martial artist and an actor. Before Bruce, Asian actors in Western cinema were often confined to stereotypes, either comic relief or background villains. Bruce changed that overnight. He walked onto the screen with a presence that demanded respect, and suddenly Hollywood had to pay attention. He wasn't just performing martial arts. He was showing the world that someone who looked like him could lead a film, inspire millions, and break cultural barriers that had stood for generations. Bolo, who spent much of his career playing villains, understood the importance of that shift more than most. He knew that Bruce had opened doors that might never have opened otherwise. Even if Bolo himself was typecast as the heavy, he recognized that Bruce's success changed the way audiences viewed martial arts actors. It wasn't just about kicks and punches anymore. It was about authenticity, philosophy, and cultural pride. For For Bolo, Bruce's greatest legacy wasn't his physical skills, as incredible as they were. It was his mind, his philosophy of self-expression, individuality, and discipline. Bruce taught people that martial arts weren't just about fighting. They were about becoming the best version of yourself, about breaking limitations and refusing to be boxed in by tradition or prejudice. That message resonated across the globe, inspiring not just fighters, but anyone chasing a dream against the odds. To this day, Bolo insists there will never be another Bruce Lee. He believed Bruce's combination of talent, vision, and charisma was one of a kind. But at the same time, Bolo dedicated his career to carrying forward the essence of what Bruce stood for. Through his own performances, he tried to bring the same authenticity to the screen, refusing to let martial arts be reduced to tricks or gimmicks. In interviews, he often reminded fans that real martial arts comes from discipline, sacrifice, and truth, not camera edits or CGI. And in doing so, he kept Bruce's spirit alive in his own way. Beyond the industry, Bruce's influence stretched into culture itself. He gave kids who had never seen someone like themselves on screen a hero to look up to. He gave martial artists around the world a new standard of excellence, and he gave audiences a glimpse of what it looked like to turn philosophy into action. For Bolo, this wasn't just history, it was personal. He carried those lessons into his own life, shaping the way he trained, the way he worked, and the way he thought about success. Even now, when he reflects on their time together, his words are less about rivalry and more about gratitude. He once said, "There will never be another Bruce Lee. I am privileged to have had the honor of calling him my friend." That single statement sums up everything about their bond. To the world, they were co-stars locked in an unforgettable battle on screen. To Bolo, Bruce was a brother, a teacher, and a man whose legacy continues to echo through every punch and every philosophy lesson that came after. As fans, we are left to wonder, was Bruce Lee's greatest legacy his unmatched martial arts, his cultural impact, or the philosophy that continues to inspire generations long after his passing? The answer might be all three. What is certain is that his presence forever changed Bolo Yeung, Hollywood, and the world of martial arts. And perhaps that is the truest measure of a legend, not just what they achieved in their own lifetime, but the fire they leave burning in those who carry their memory forward.